So what Sam does, it seems to me, is manage data. Google is a data company, and it will be one of the most important data companies in the world. Pelmerex is a data company, and data is the new oil, as we all know. The people that have it, we will be buying it from them at some point. And of course, the reason that's so important is because of AI. Canada invented AI. I think we can say that fairly well. Okay, Turing invented it, but Canada is the place that people look to say AI lives here. Geoff Hinton has been doing AI in this country for 40 years. It's actually been going on so long that there's a winter that he refers to, a period of time when it was just so crackpot and fringe that they weren't even invited to conferences anymore. But what we know is that AI is here. We all have it in a dumb form. But the smart AI is also with us. And there are many, many smart people in this country developing things that are going to touch our lives in big and important ways. And we have one of them with us. Tomi Poutanen, did I do that right? He's a pioneer and a global thought leader. He's worked with Geoff Hinton. And he's created a company called Layer 6 AI. You've probably heard of it, Toronto-based company. One of the real trailblazers that TD Bank has recently acquired. So congratulations to you. I hope they don't ruin it. He's now Chief AI Officer for TD, and obviously he's a serial tech entrepreneur who's sold other businesses, so he knows what this looks like. But the fact that he went with his company to TD, I think says a lot about what might happen next. And I'm looking forward to hearing his story. He's also, I should note, one of the founding members of the Vector Institute, which is this hugely important ecosystem we've created here in Toronto, along with Montreal and Edmonton as centers of AI. So please join me in welcoming Tomi Poutanen.
Hi there. All right, we got one more. So thanks for this. So I'm going to be talking about AI and Canada's amazing role in bringing AI to the world. What I feel is Canada's greatest contribution, even more great than our great hockey players out there. So I'll go through three things. So one is just some history around AI and Toronto's role in it, the socioeconomic impact, because let's not kid ourselves, AI will have an impact. I think scanning the room here, we'll all be the beneficiaries of it, but it will have an impact on our children's lives and those less fortunate than us. And it's important to talk about that, in particular for your organizations. And then Canada has not only an academic and theoretical foundation in it, but also wants to make a play to be a world leader in it. So I'll talk about the Vector Institute and the government's bets in this area. And then last, we'll talk about opportunities for charitable organizations with AI. All right, so let's go back to school. So this here represents an image classifier using neural networks. It loosely mirrors how the human brain works. So in the human brain, you have cells. They're stacked on top of each other, so you have multiple layers of cells. And every layer adds an extra bit of inside abstraction to the data layer. So this here, if these connections are correct and the weights are correct, you'd have the pixels as inputs be fed into this model on the left. And if the weights are proper, then the dog neuron will light up. So that's what it is in theory. All a computer scientist has to do is figure out how to set those weights. Simple enough, right? This gentleman here, he tried it. His name is Marvin Minsky, considered the godfather of AI. And as soon as computer chips were invented, these scientists thought, hey, great, now we can just replicate the human mind in a chip. And in no short order, we'll have robots that talk to us. But after 14 years of trying, he gave up. He said, these neural networks, they're too opaque, too detailed. They bring us no closer to understanding human intellect. And he wrote a book in 1970 poo-pooing the idea of using neural networks and moved the field on to other areas like expert systems and others. And into this field graduated a gentleman, a British guy by the name of Geoff Hinton. He comes from very good lineage. So his great-great-grandfather is George Boole, that created Boolean logic. That's a foundation of computing. And he graduated with a psychology degree, really wanted to understand how the human brain worked. But he was so dissatisfied with how computer scientists were approaching it that he dropped out. He was a carpenter for a year, a carpenter, right? And before he was lured back and got his PhD in Edinburgh. And then later in CMU at Pittsburgh, he was the one with two other colleagues who invented this algorithm for training these weights, and it's called the back propagation algorithm. And everything that you now hear about for self-driving cars, etc., are based on this algorithm invented in 1986. And essentially, the idea is that if you can express what you're trying to achieve as a continuous function, then you can use some fancy calculus to get an integral of it and backpropagate that derivative down multiple layers and tweak those weights a tiny bit, up or down, to get closer to the desired output. And that was his innovation. And in '86, he was in the US, and the only funding organizations that took interest was really the US military. They thought, interesting, maybe we can use this to kill people. And he didn't like that. He's a very, very ethical guy. He's adopted children from South America, and he didn't like how the US was handling its foreign affairs. And in '87, he made the decision to move to Canada. And he was attracted here for Canada's track record of funding long-term curiosity-based research. In particular, CFAR and CFI. There's a few granting agencies that gave him long-term funding to pursue this crazy idea. And he attracted other individuals too. So really the hotbed across the world for studying neural networks was here in Canada. Toronto, Montreal, and later in Edmonton. While there was now a theoretical approach of how you can train these neural networks, it turned out that getting that to do something useful was difficult. So now 14 years later, this is about as far as they had gone. In 14 years, they were being used to process checks in the US, to do digit recognition. So not that far. Maybe Marvin Minsky was right, that neural networks will not get you any closer to understanding the human brain. I actually met him. I was a grad student in '96, and I kind of felt that way. And I moved on I worked in the West Coast, and actually, ironically enough, ended up working in machine learning and neural networks. But a lot of people thought that Geoff Hinton and his kind were on the fringe of academic research. Fast forward now a few more years. In mid-2000s, there were a few things that changed. So number one is processing power finally caught up, and the data sets became large enough that you could train these things in volume. There were also some theoretical breakthroughs that he'll say they don't matter, but they do matter. He likes to say that I was right all along. It was just the world and the computing power had to catch up. But the first place where this was demonstrated was at Google's Android speech recognition system, which was deployed in 2011. And if you remember when Siri first came out, there was a promise that you could talk to your phone, but it was frustrating after the initial few attempts. The error rate was just too high. But Google quietly launched their now neural network-based speech recognition system, and people who were in this field took note. They said, wow, something big changed, but they didn't really know what changed. Ironically, Geoff and his students had taken this to BlackBerry a year prior, but apparently the keyboard was too good to give up, and there was no need for speech recognition. To which that had turned out differently. But where the public finally started to realize these neural networks could do something useful was in 2012. And that was in a challenge called the ImageNet challenge. And here the task is for an algorithm to try to label these high-resolution color images with a label. So far removed from the digit recognition challenge from before. And you can see here some examples of mite, container ship, motor scooter, and a leopard, how hard those are to recognize, even for a human being. And of course, orchids and elephants, they come in all kinds of different shapes and sizes. The traditional vision experts had gathered this large data set and were working on it. They weren't making tremendous progress. The error rate was about 25%, were misclassified. But out of nowhere, Geoff and his students submitted a neural network approach to it, and they achieved an error rate of 16%. And the year after, their error rate was down to 11%. And just to put this in context, so Geoff now, this is 2012, since 1986, like that is, he had been working on this problem, trying to make these neural networks do something useful, and everybody had laughed them off. Now, finally, he was able to demonstrate that they could be world-beating. He had actually had to change, he was doing neural network research, and whenever he tried to submit a paper for publication, if it had the word neural networks in the title, it would be automatically rejected. So he had to recoin the term deep learning, if you're wondering what the terminology is. So not only is he a good marketer, he's a great data scientist. He got everybody excited about it. And to give you an idea, I've got two lines in this graph. The right column actually expresses how many layers of neurons he used. The human neocortex has 6 layers. So obviously with computers, there's no biological constraint. You can keep adding more. Now, computer scientists finally got very excited with this new notion, this new toolkit, and jumped in. The year after, Google put a submission in. It was their ImageNet. It was their the Google Net algorithm. And here they've added 22 layers. That just shows you what that looks like. And the year after that, Microsoft, not to be outdone, put a network with 152 layers. So a couple of remarkable things about this thing. First of all, look how quickly the error rates declined. When there's enough data, enough effort put in this, computers do an exceptionally good job. They do such a good job that they beat a human. This is called superhuman capability. If any of you were trying to label these images, your error rate would be, after lots of training, your error rate would be about 5%. So a computer here reaches a 3.5% error rate. And of course, that's driven by the fact that there's no biological constraint at this. When they were trained, millions of input images were fed in, and you now have these neural networks with thousands of layers, right? So kind of scary. Like, what does that mean to humans? Are we replaceable, right? Just remarkable how fast this is, the capability that this has introduced. All right, so what does that mean to humanity? Are we all going to be replaceable? Certainly, there's a lot of talk and a lot of fear about humans being replaced by machines. There's even a study made to this effect from University of Oxford. They classified all these U.S. jobs to see, well, which job categories are at risk of being automated away. And you see a lot of jobs in things like sales and clerical, office administrative, farming and construction that are in jeopardy. They said the punchline is that 47% of all jobs are at risk. So that's quite a significant thing that we're looking at. And this wave is coming fast. So this is a typical S-curve of disruption, of technology adoption and how that's disrupting the world and how quickly technology is now adopted in our connected world. When there's a superior technology, commercial economic forces will make that technology be adopted at an incredible clip around the world. You can see that telephones and cars took a long time to be adopted, but an iPad was fast, or so online games will reach hundreds of millions of users within weeks. Crazy birds, I was thinking of. Let's just see, like, what does this look like in a pictorial way? When cars were introduced into the market, this is a picture from 1900. There's one car on the left-hand side. 13 years later, horses were nowhere in sight. And at this time, a lot of people were concerned about what this will mean to jobs. What does this mean to the people who take care of and raise horses, the individuals who have to clean up the streets afterwards, etc.? But the reality at this transition time was that there's a massive increase in mobility that offset the horse breeders, etc. That there's enormous economic benefits and job creation in auto manufacturing, infrastructure, car insurance, drivers, etc. Petroleum industry. But that's not necessarily true when we're looking at AI into the future. So the socioeconomic impact, there's two possible competing outcomes. On one hand, people will say half the jobs might be displaced. On the other hand, people will say, well, there's an enormous amount of economic opportunity that jurisdictions that lead in AI can expect a doubling in their GDP growth. And the question to us is, well, which side of the coin do we want to be on? AI is coming, like it or not. It's in our interest to be a player in it. So how are we doing as a nation? How are we doing in capturing that economic opportunity? This here is a slide, an image I've grabbed from in the summertime that represents all private businesses, so unicorn companies, by market capital. And it shows you how much wealth is being created by innovators in the US and in China predominantly. There's one blip there for Canada. That's Kik Interactive, which is a teenage messaging app, which is the only private company labeled as a unicorn company in Canada. And it's arguably, one can argue whether that value is still justified. So looking at new enterprises, private company valuations, one certainly wouldn't call Canada winning. Looking at public companies, it gets a little bit more stark still. So recently, there's been an amazing run-up in tech company valuations, where all of Amazon, Facebook, Tencent, and Alibaba passed Berkshire Hathaway. And so the top 7 most valuable companies in the world are now tech companies, 5 in the US, 2 in China. Long gone the days when we had BlackBerry and Nortel at $100 billion valuations. Now we have companies like CGI Group, Constellation, Shopify, and BlackBerry, right? So if you accept the fact that AI is going to vastly change economies, and there's great danger in our future generations' employability if we're not a player, things aren't looking so positive. So something needs to be done about it. So let's talk about what's possible. So Geoff Hinton was actually one of the first people who sold his capabilities to Google. He was at Google for a 4-year period after the ImageNet challenge. And his 4-year earnout came due in the spring of, actually just shy of 2 years ago. And when it did, my partner Jordan and I, we went to Geoff and said, hey, Geoff, now that you're back in Toronto, let's do something real with AI. And we, in the process, we met Ed Clark, who helped put us in front of government and industry to build enough critical mass to build an AI ecosystem and an academic center. This was me going to the cabinet in Ontario, pitching for money, and I quickly realized I have to buy some suits. But no matter. The argument was the following. So government wants an improvement in our productivity and jobs creation. Companies recognize the need for AI, but there's just not enough graduates. There's an incredible supply-demand imbalance. University of Toronto was graduating maybe six PhDs a year. 5 of them at least would go overseas, and 1 would stay here. They would have hired 5,000 of these graduates if they were available. And researchers, they didn't just disappear for the big check. They disappeared because they felt there's nobody here in Canada taking AI seriously. They wanted to be with the world's best, and usually the world's best were at the Googles and the Facebooks in the world. So we put a proposal together for an AI institute that had enough critical mass and funding to be real. And the pushback we often got was, wow, didn't we already lose this game? Can we really win in this game that's so contested? And the answer was the following. Number one is we have Geoff Hinton here. He will be recognized 30 years from now as the Einstein of our era. He's here. He's such a magnet for talent. We're taking the University of Toronto kind of scattered AI profs, putting them into Mars, a world-class facility that just seeds opportunity and has a real critical mass. Mars itself is in one of the most livable cities, one of the most attractive cities in the world, and Toronto is within a corridor that has a tech community that's second only to Silicon Valley in concentration of tech workers. That's demonstrated by some amazing successes we have in incubating companies. This is Jay Agrawal from University of Toronto's Creative Destruction Lab that now runs the world's largest AI accelerator. And of course, we have the world's best recruiter, this gentleman here. And I'll just move off that guy. But it is true that we have this opportunity for the next 4 years, maybe 8 years, where Canada, from a geopolitical perspective, is an incredibly attractive place. In fact, it's the only place that has its doors open for researchers coming out of Iran and other places. And it's not just the US, it's the UK, security issues in Europe, et cetera. Canada is an incredible place where a researcher can uproot their family and come to a place and establish themselves here. So the Vector Institute was funded with $220 million from various levels of the government. It's going to get to a state where there's 400 researchers, basically 10xing the size of the University of Toronto machine learning department from before. And so now, a year or 10 months later, people will say, well, are we winning? And I would say to you that we certainly have early signs that we are winning. So number one is a lot of international companies are establishing AI research labs here. One of them was Uber, who hired Raquel Urdison to lead Uber's self-driving car efforts. But Google, Samsung, a whole bunch of international companies are now establishing themselves here. They're no longer looking to just pick off talent as it graduates one after another. We've also seen, in the last year, an incredible resurgence of venture capital investment into Canadian AI companies. So all of these companies have raised $50 million checks from some of the world's top venture capital firms. And where in the past, VCs would insist on the company moving to Silicon Valley, now they want those companies to stay here and grow these companies here because they know Toronto is the best place to build an AI business. My business, Layer 6, as was introduced, was just recently acquired by TD Bank. And one of the first things we do here is that we are introducing a full cycle of investment where Canadian angel money funded the business, Canadians started the business, a Canadian company bought the business, so the IP and the cash all circulates here. And in the past, that story has always been, a promising Canadian company either gets picked up early or the venture capital money comes from the US, requiring the team to move to the US. So the IP and the team and the value that's created all leaves the country. So certainly looking at it from an investment community perspective, we're certainly seeing early signs of promise. And we've built this amazing AI community now, where I would say that people from around the world are flocking here. Vector Institute has made its first 10 hires. Many of them are from some of the world's best hires that we wouldn't have dreamed of getting a year ago. And we'll be the only jurisdiction that's well supplied in AI talent. And what we do with it is really up to everyone in this room and Canada's industry. So just quickly, I'll just wrap up with some opportunities for charitable organizations. So first is, one thing that's very natural for AI and for Toronto is to be a player in healthcare innovation with AI. We have a digitized health records. We have a single-payer model that protects 100% of the population. We have a world-class medical research community, and we have AI chops. And that AI can transform healthcare in various ways. One of the first to recognize it is Peter Monk, who made a $100 million further donation to the cardiac center at UHN, and a good portion of that was set out for cardiac care with AI. But I can think of every single other field, oncology, et cetera, where there can be opportunities for AI-accelerated transformation of those health verticals. Another one is around conservation and using the power of AI and drones, satellite imagery, et cetera, to really manage large geographic areas, obviously required in Canada, but also in our international work. Again, AI can be transformative on that front. And on the last point is being able to introduce technologies into your organizations that let you reach your constituents on a mobile device using chatbots, et cetera. It can help you accelerate your business reach more people and just service more people in a more intuitive way, in ways people are accustomed to interacting with technology today. So those are some 3 areas where I see some immediate opportunities for AI for this room. But of course, there's a lot of opportunities also to transform organizations in like your internal organizations to be more effective with the power of AI. So that's it. Thank you very much for your time.